This episode of the Switchpoint podcast is sponsored by Industrial Rail Journal. IRJ was created to shine light on one of the most important but often overlooked sectors of the rail industry, industrial rail operations. From chemical plants and steel mills to grain terminals and transload facilities, thousands of businesses rely on rail infrastructure every single day. Industrial Rail Journal was built to highlight the people, operations, safety, and infrastructure that keep the rail industry moving. Learn more at industrialrailjournal.com.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Switchpoint podcast powered by Axiom Rail Services. I'm your host, Joe Poro. Today, we're going to be talking about what makes us unique, which is our audits, which is what we're famously known for and how in-depth those go. We're going to break that down into an awesome episode. But before we do, please be sure to give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to the show, and make sure you subscribe to our channels. Today, we're going to jump right in to our audits. A little bit of this is going to be kind of giving away some of our trade secrets, but that's okay because the ultimate idea here is not to keep all that information close to the vest. It's to share it with the industry so that people can know, hey, this is what we're looking for. This is what we need to be cognizant of out in the field. As employers, this is stuff that we need to look for consistently. And the idea is to get this message across to the industry as much as possible. So I love sharing this information. It's very unique to us. This is first time really talking about kind of what's behind the scenes for us and what our audits do consist of. But I think it would give some insights to a lot of our listeners and our viewers about what it is that we do when we go on site and what it is that they're actually paying for. Because we have oftentimes in a very matrixed railroad organization or maybe a transload type of organization where you have ownership who's purchasing these audits, and then you have on-site management and field personnel who don't exactly know what's happening. They're thinking, is there going to be any lost downtime? Is there going to be any interruptions in service? Is there going to be people walking all around my yard? Is there going to be people in between moving trains? And it's like, no, none of that happens. So we're going to talk about what it is that we do, what we're auditing, and clear up some of those questions. And I think it'll be a really insightful episode. And of course, please be sure to comment, leave your comments on any of our episodes as well. And we'll be happy to address them in any upcoming episodes. So I guess kind of let's dive into it, right? Let's assume either the customer calls us or our salespeople, our outreach team reaches the customer, and we are able to schedule an audit. What does that audit look like? Well, there's two legs that we stand on. One of them is going to be the compliance and field audit, and the second is going to be the track audit. Not every customer wants to do a track audit. They think they've got it down, and they don't usually. But we can mostly uncover, at least from a compliance standpoint, what's wrong with the track portions without having our track inspectors go out there and actually walk the track. So let's just assume that we go out there doing just a field and compliance audit. So we get on site. Well, before we do that, let me back up. Before we go out there, we sign non-disclosures with everybody. We have every customer sign an NDA because we do things out at the site, like take pictures. We see the skeletons in their closet. Maybe there was a fatality or an injury of some kind, and they don't want that information getting out. We keep that between us and the customer when we go out there, and we say, look, we're coming to look for all of the skeletons in your closet. And we do a very wonderful job of that, right? And our job is to find the weakest link in their chain, whether that's efficiency, safety, or compliance, and build them up from there. And so you can, imagine that's an uncomfortable feeling for a lot of these customers to just be that exposed to us. But part of that non-disclosure really gives them that warm and fuzzy feeling like, hey, we're here on your team. Even if we find something, it's not our job to, yell at you about it. It's our job to at least identify it and then build you guys up from there. And we can plug you into any one of our turnkey programs, or we can completely customize what your rail operations need to look like, or what they should look like based off of what they do look like. So when I keep saying the word audit, a lot of companies, they get nervous. They think, oh my God, this is like a tax audit, or this is like some kind of in-depth audit. And it's like, well, yes, it is in-depth, but it doesn't require a whole lot on your part, maybe just answering some questions, because we're out here all the time and we can see within the first hour or so kind of where you're at roughly. Most of the time we do this over the phone. Our sales team talks to you. You talk to me. You talk to our director of operations. You talk to any safety guy. Like, we can figure this out right away over the phone. And if it's worth coming on site, if you're squared away or not, based off of some of the language that we're talking about. And it's when we come out there, it doesn't have to be such a heavy feeling. Our audits, you can consider them more or less a gap analysis, right? And that's a lot easier to digest for some of these companies. Some people want to get into the weeds. Some people, like the ownership teams, just want to see, okay, give me like a grade. Where am I at on a scale of 0 to 100, right? And we, of course, include that in the reports as well, along with pictures. But when we go out there, while we do get in depth and the report can be very in depth, we also have, the first few pages where it just says at high level stuff, this is what's wrong, this was the findings, and this needs to be what's corrected. And one of the things that I love about our audits is that we don't just say, here's how messed up your site is. We also give you actionable growth plans to follow to get to compliance, right? So whether we're the ones who are helping you or not, at least we've pointed you and steered you in the right direction. And, when people call us and ask for things, it's not like we're a law firm where we charge you for every email or we do these crazy, ridiculous consultation agreements. Like, that's not our moneymaker, right? Our moneymaker is longevity with the customer and serious growth. We're not there to pat you on the back and tell you that everything looks great, right? We're there to tell you what's wrong with the situation, and we're there to fix it the right way. And so that's something like we're all super passionate about. And I love going out there and I love finding what's wrong and doing a root cause analysis, because more than finding what's wrong, I love to watch the growth happen. And so does every member that goes out there and that does an audit on behalf of Axiom. Like, we genuinely love to see our customers succeed. And it's like watching your children grow up. It's like, man, I raised them right, kind of thing. It's a good feeling. Everyone wants to see their work, see their mark left. And it's like, why should we withhold that information? We should be able to impart that wisdom as frequently and as, expansively as possible. So that's what we're going to talk about. But let's assume we sign the non-disclosure. We get on site with the customer. What are we looking at? Okay, well, we sit down with the customer and sometimes their leadership team or maybe their safety team, and we sit at a conference table or in a huddle room, and we have a bunch of questions that we go down and ask. And we've streamlined it into a really good app where it's yes or no. And if you hit yes or you hit no, it'll hit a drop down button and it'll ask further questions, because it's never just surface level. Everything we do is in the weeds, and that's where we live, right? Some people want that, well, a consultant shouldn't say things are at risk. And it's like, no, we do. We'll tell you. Right? Because we're doing a disservice to the guys that are working at your job, and we're doing a disservice to you by being out there and blowing smoke up your butt. We need you to know what it is that we're seeing. So we get really into the weeds. And I'll give you some examples of that. So let's say it's a transload site. Maybe they have 10 tracks and they've got a track mobile or a rail car mover of some sort, and they have a short line or a class 1 or somebody spotting and pulling cars for them all the time. So they're an active rail site and they're part of the general system. We can reasonably determine that they're part of the general system. Now, we can't make that 209 assessment, which says you are part of the general system. And likewise, you guys don't get to claim we are not part of the general system, right? Only FRA can make that determination. But we can tell you based off of our experience, right? Hey, you guys are for sure part of the general system. So in this scenario, this customer would be part of the general system. We're going to sit down and tell them, here's what you're subject to. Here's all the CFR parts. And that's how our audit goes from part 209 or 171 really, or even 131. And, if you have if you're an oil facility or something and you have above ground oil storages and you got spill plans that you're required, we start from there and we work all the way down to the 243. Okay. And every one of those CFR parts is covered in depth, and we go over that. Maybe they have a locomotive, maybe they don't, but we get there. So let's say, for instance, this customer is near a river, a big river, and they have, crude oil that they're navigating through their facilities, and they have a bunch of oil tanks and tank cars and whatnot. They might do typically an online hazmat training. So going in numerical order, starting with hazmat codes, the CFR parts at 171, right? We're going to start looking into that and say, okay, do you guys move hazardous materials? Yes, we do. Okay, what time or what type? They say it's a crude oil. All right. So we're moving a class 3 commodity, and you're near a navigable waterway. Have you guys contacted U.S. Coast Guard? Do you have a security action plan or a facility response plan? And they're like, no, what is that? It's like, okay, well, now we've uncovered a new can of worms that you guys didn't even know. So what we do is not just with FRA, but it's all these adjacent agencies that will still affect you as a customer, right? We kind of go beyond that. Now, we're not going to write your SPCC plans, your tier 1, tier 2, but we're still going to tell you this is what you need to have done within that realm of responsibility because it pertains to your rail activity, right? And people are stunned to find out that there's more than one agency suddenly that they should be reporting to, they should be getting things cleared from. And so there's a lot of knowledge to share with these customers. So anyway, that's kind of what that looks like. We get in there, we start asking questions about their hazmat. Then we look at maybe their certificates. Maybe we look at their record keeping. We look at their training, the quality of training. We look to see if does their Bureau of Explosive tariff number match what they're supposed to have? And we run through that and show them, like, here's the BOE tariff number. This is what the training requires. This is what your record keeping requires. You know, that's aligned with the CFR parts. We look at their security action plan. Do they even have one? Do they have a facility response plan? They're supposed to have one. We look at all those different things. So at a high level, we look at their compliance, right? We look at the facility, and then we look at the operations. And then, like I said earlier, on that other leg, we'll go and inspect track if that's something that they want us to do as well, and actually get the measurements and geotag stuff. But looking at just the compliance, we sit down in the initial interview with the customer, and we start to run down these list of questions. And whether they say yes or no opens up a new box for us to then follow down into different buckets of information. And we take that and we put that into one comprehensive report when we're done. So the audit, the initial sit down runs through, do you do this? Do you do this? Do you do this? What do you have? Where do you move it? How do you move it? What do you do? And it's just all those questions that really starts to paint that canvas for us. Once we have that information, that's when we go outside with our tablets and iPads and phones, and we start to take pictures, because that's going to be what's inserted into the report. Nothing we find is just hearsay or best practices. It's all going to be documented. It's going to be a picture taken. We're going to circle it and we're going to put it in the report. So that way, not only does ownership get to see exactly what it is we're talking about, but now again, they have a picture of a starting point on what to go out there and what to fix, right? Because if we tell them, hey, you know, your placards are faded and worn and you're still sending these outbound cars, and maybe you're loading them and the placards need to be replaced, or the inspection dates are out of date. No, we actually take a picture and we'll give them the car number and we'll give them the track so they can go out there and physically know where to begin working on something or where to bad order something, right? And we run all the way through those CFR parts. It's very, very in-depth. I won't release all of them and how we do all of that stuff, right? Some of that stuff is proprietary to us, right? And it goes aligned with our software development, but essentially know that we will run through every single CFR part, and whether it applies or not, we'll make that determination for you guys, because not everyone knows that. So when we're out in the field, we already have that knowledge. Our guys have firsthand knowledge of, okay, they said they do this, so we know that this should be in place. So what does a customer facility look like? Well, in this same example, where there may be a class 3 hazardous material that they're moving, commodity that they're moving near navigable waterways, they got tank cars and a car mover, we start going out there and we start to look around who's actually moving. If we see a rail crew moving, then we're going to sit there and watch the rail crew. How do they do things? Are they calling things like maybe their red zone? Are they protecting their shove? Are they giving car counts? Are they giving updates, right? So we watch and we listen. Not every time does a customer have an extra radio for us to listen in on. Sometimes they do, and we're able to hear what commands are being given, right? Sometimes the commands, depending on the geographic location, they might be in English, they might be in Spanish, and you might have some employees who are new who don't speak a different language. They're like, what are you all saying? Right? But the idea is, okay, so now we know that there's a breakdown in communication, which is normally a giveaway. Slips, trips, and falls are a big one. So like walking pathways, communication is always the biggest one that we see. But anyway, we'll go out there and we'll watch the crews switch if they're actively switching, and we'll see, what are they doing? Does it align with, maybe the G-Core standards or NORAC procedures, or, the CROR? Are they best practices? Have they been trained, and do they align with their Part 217 and 218s? Right? So then we go out there and we start watching them, and we're like, man, this guy's not even wearing PPE. He's just climbing up on cars, doing what he knows how to do, probably to his best standard. And so again, everything we do is non-invasive. It doesn't require downtime. So we're watching these movements happen. We're watching how hard they couple into cars. We're watching, are they kicking cars? Should they be kicking these cars? We're watching if they build outbound trains. Is that train, compliant? Do they have shiftable loads next to hazardous material cars and they're setting them out for pickup? Even though that's not necessarily always on them, right? But the point is we're always looking for these little things. Are these cars spray painted over? Can you even read the like the car number, the nomenclature of the car itself? Like, probably not, because they're all covered up and faded and dilapidated. It's like, well, then you can't offer some of these cars out to service. So we look at all of that as well. We go out there and we start to look at the actual infrastructure around the site. So maybe a class 3 hazardous material site might also be required to have their DOT security action plan. Do they have fencing up? Do they have cameras up? Do they have no trespassing signs? Are they rural or are they in an urban area? What is the threat level assessment? We go through there and we start looking at that as well. Maybe they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing because there are systems in place. And maybe we uncovered that in the interview, right? Maybe we said, do you guys even have SOPs? Do you even have a handbook, a rule book on any of this stuff? And most of the time the customers don't, but there are times that they do. And so we're like, okay, we know that you have procedures in place. Once we're done watching the movement happen, we'll start to talk with the customers. Okay. We'll bring them in for in-person interviews. So if we go out there and we complete the audit, we look at the facility and we bring them in for an interview afterwards, we ask them, hey, why did you just jump in between the train without calling a red zone? And they say, oh, well, it's just faster if I jump in. Okay, well, now we know that that's aligned with a procedure deviation, not a lack of procedures, versus if we ask them, why'd you jump in without calling a red zone? And they say, what's a red zone? What's in between? What's a live train? Okay, that's not a procedure deviation. That's a lack of training or a lack of knowledge. So we, of course, break that down into a chart as well. We'll talk more about that later. But going back to the customer example, if they're moving or if they're not, or if we've already watched them make their moves, or maybe there's no moves to be made, then we'll start to go out and we'll audit the facility. Do you have eye wash stations? Do you have fire extinguishers nearby? Do you have all the right tools that you need? Maybe you don't have any wheel chocks out there. What are you using to chalk up these cars, right? Because OSHA 1917 also comes into effect, as well. And it's like, are you chalking the rail cars? And they're like, no, didn't know I was supposed to be. Right. Then we look at, what are your spotting procedures or your pulling procedures? Do you have derailers out there? Do you have a job board that says where your derailers are? Do you have radios that you're supposed to be using that you're not? Maybe we walk around and we see that the property is shared by somebody else. And it's like, okay, well, now you've got somebody else dipping in and out of your site without you knowing about it. Do you have keys or locks on there, or are they shared like 102 keys or 105 keys, or are they your own keys, right? Are you putting up blue flags? Then we look at the Part 218, the blue flag procedures themselves, right? Okay, do you got men working in, on, under, or about the cars? Okay, great. Where's your blue flag? Well, they say, what's a blue flag, right? Or maybe they have a blue flag up, but it's in the wrong spot or on the wrong track. Or maybe the blue flag is up, but the switch isn't lined against movement and it's not secured with an effective locking device, which is a big one. Half the time, they just put up the blue flag and they leave the switch lined open. And then it's like, that little flag is not going to stop another rail car from rolling in or out, right? That switch is going to stop the rail car from rolling in or out unwanted. And so you make sure that the switch isn't inadvertently thrown. You put an effective locking device, which is not like an S hook or like a little cotter pin. It's an actual lock, right? And then you put your tag on it, your flag up, and we show them like, look, this is how you do these procedures. So we go out there and we take pictures of every little thing that we see. So if it's a blue flag issue and we see the switch open, we take a picture of the entire overlay. We look at the switch. Maybe that doesn't have a number. We take a picture of the switch point, of the lock, of the blue flag, and we say, here's 1, 2, and 3 things that are wrong with this, or maybe there's 1, 2 things wrong with it. And we start to tally that up in our software. And at the end of the report, that's when we put how many number of findings we have, and that shows us where a good starting point is. We also try to ask for a layout of the facility so that way we know which number track it is. Because let's say maybe tracks 1 and 2 are known for pulling and spotting cars, and track 3 is maybe a RIP track where there's not a whole lot of stuff happening on it, right? Seems like most of the action is going to happen on track 1 and 2. So we tell them, hey, in our report, it's kind of like a game of Clue, right? Colonel Mustard killed Mrs. So-and-so with the candlestick, right? It's like, well, we do the same thing in the reports. We say here in the yard in track 1, you have the highest blue flag failures or findings out here, right? So that gives their on-site safety team a good starting point. And customers like that because, as easy as it is to just turn things over to Axiom and say, please fix our rail stuff, please get us compliant. Some customers, and hats off to them, want to roll up their sleeves and get it done their way. And we're here for that, right? But they just might not know where to start. Or maybe they've brought in somebody This is a big one. Sometimes they'll hire an old conductor or an old engineer, and now that person is expected to be their go-to compliance person. It's like, well, wait a minute. They only know how to do things that they were taught based off of certain best practices or industry practices. They weren't your compliance experts. So if we start to ask them some of these auditing questions that an inspector is going to say, like maybe the FRA is going to send this dude a memo and it's going to say, hey, we're coming out on this date to look for your Part 219 drug and alcohol program. And they're like, I don't know anything about that. I just know how to switch cars. I was a conductor and an engineer. This is how we do things, right? But now the company or the customer is still exposed. So there's a lot more that goes into just best practices, but that's something that we also look at in the field. Okay, so we start with the initial discussion in the audit. We sit down and we ask the customer all these questions. Then we go out into the field. We look at the switching operations, and then we look at the facility. One of the things that we like to try and do as an extra step is where I will go back to what I said earlier. That's where we try to bring in some of the switchmen that are out there, the switching crew, and we'll try and sit them down as many as we can or as many as are available, and we'll ask them questions. Why did you do this? I wanted to know, right? We don't go up there and interrupt them during their operations and say, you shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing this, because that is not the right time or place to have a coaching and a teaching mindset or have them learn a lesson, right? We're going to let them do the things the way that they do, unless it is just obviously, blatantly dangerous. Then, of course, anyone on the job site has the stop work authority. We would go up there and we'd tell them, hey, that's really dangerous, don't do that, right? But if it's just, maybe a failure of best practices or whatever, or we see something that needs to be addressed, we would like to try and bring the customer workforce in and interview maybe a handful of them. We saw this happening, and we tell them right off the bat, no answer you give is a bad answer. We just want to know, why did you do that? Is that how you were shown? Did you ever receive a rule book on this? Did you ever receive any kind of training? And some people give all kinds of off-the-wall answers. It's, oh, well, that's how Fred showed me. It's like, well, who is Fred? Oh, well, Fred, he used to work with Tim. So, well, who's Tim? Well, Tim retired 8 years ago. It's like, okay, so that's a game of telephone, right? Or maybe we ask somebody and they say, I don't know. I was never shown. I'm the forklift driver, but sometimes I help out on the rail crew. It's like, okay, so that's a lack of training. So then we'd mark that down and tally that up. Or maybe we ask somebody, like I said earlier, why did you do this? And they say, oh, this is faster. Okay, well, so that's a procedure deviation. And so we have all these different categories, right? Lack of knowledge, lack of training, procedure deviation, unqualified. And we put all of those into one big chart, right? And then we show that to the leadership team before we leave, and we go over our reports. We don't just leave them with a big old stack of papers and say, all right, well, decipher this for yourself. We're there the entire way with the customer, and we show them. We deliver the report. We present the report. We cover it. We do Q&A over the report, and then we tell them, hey, here's what we can offer you this as a turnkey corrective action, or you guys can do this yourself. But going back to the interviews, right? That's just an added bonus. Not every customer of ours is going to have that option, that flexibility. Some of the guys are maybe at the end of the shift. They're trying to go home. Some of the guys they just don't want to answer, or they don't want to talk, or they don't want to participate, which is fine, because our experts, when we go out there, we know exactly what we're looking for, right? We know exactly what it is we're supposed to be finding. So we've already put that whole picture together in our head, and then we build the report using our software program, and we deliver it to the customer. The other leg that I had kind of mentioned that we stand on is the track inspection portion, which goes hand in hand, and it's complementary to our compliance and field audit, right? So the track inspector goes out there and he will measure the tracks. He will look at the ties. He will look at all kinds of different stuff out there. The curvature, he'll look at the ballast. He'll look at, is it flooded? He'll look at the plates. He'll look at the spike patterns. He'll look at everything. And just based off of the knowledge that we have, maybe this is a class 1 site that says only these instruments can be used and this spike pattern has to be used. And we can measure it to that standard as well, right? As well as industry standards. And we can help them determine the class of track that they run, right? Maybe they don't even know. Most of these customers have no idea what class of track they have. They don't designate it. They don't have any formal inspections done. Or if they do, it's not even to the right cadence. Maybe it's like we ask them, hey, how often are you inspecting your tracks? And they say, oh, we got a guy who does that once a year and it's squared away. It's like, wait a minute. are you landing trains on this track? Oh yeah, BN comes in every day and they spot and pull on all these tracks and they switch their cars and they build their train and then they leave. And it's like, okay, wherever the general system goes, it carries with it, that responsibility. So if the general system is landing on your tracks, you're responsible for maintaining those tracks to a certain standard. And then a lot of people say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's something that we always face. That's always going to be an uphill battle. And it's like, it is broke, right? You just haven't been caught yet. And it always turns into something major when something bad happens. And then they panic and they come back to us. And it's like, a little bit of proactive can go such a long way. And that's one of the selling points really for our audit. It's like our audits, and we've done the math on this time and time again, our audits save exactly in this area, right? Our audits save 19 and a half times the cost in civil penalties and other financial losses, right? Like derailments or lost product or lawsuits. Our audits, the cost of our audit saves 19 and a half times the cost in damages to a customer. And it's like, I liken it to this. Why would you buy a brand new truck and never change the oil? Right? Your motor's going to seize up and then you're just going to have a block of steel sitting out or aluminum, I guess, depending on what kind of vehicle you got, right? But you're going to have a block of metal sitting out there in your driveway that's not going to be any good to you because you didn't do the required preventative maintenance. Same thing with your body. If you're 700 pounds, it's because you didn't do the required maintenance to take care of your body. Now it's no good to anybody. We try to help people take that proactive approach. A little bit can go a long way in proactive measures. So when you're getting an audit from us, not only, financially does it make sense. One, because we're saving you 19 and a half times what it's going to cost you when you kill somebody, hurt somebody, or derail something. Not only is it going to save you there, right? But we also take what you spend and then we apply that towards whatever program you choose to get with us, kind of like a diagnostics fee. It's like, it's never money lost, right? It's always something that the customer has to gain from that. So there's a lot that really goes into, our track inspection program, our auditing program, our auditing software. There's a lot of knowledge that's, needs to be shared out there. And it's funny, it's weird talking a little bit about how we do things because we see some of these other, audits that are done out there, and it might only be a 1 or 2 page report. And sometimes it might have pictures, sometimes it might not. Or maybe it's just a efficiency analysis, right? Hey, you could be doing this a little bit better if you do it this way. Okay. Well, if you're spending that much money for that, then that's not, I expect to get more information because there's so much in the realm of railroading that people just don't understand. It's like when we tell a customer, who's your program manager for your rail operations? They're like, I don't know. We don't have one. We just wait until something bad happens. It's like, oh my gosh. Okay. They're like, why do we need a program manager? Well, who manages your drug and alcohol? Who manages your hours of service? Who manages your 6180 forms, right? Who manages your training? Who does your track inspections? And they're like, I don't know. And then you say, okay, well, who repairs your track? Oh, well, we got a couple of guys who come out there and they weld on stuff and they tear up track and they put more rocks underneath. And it's like, okay, do they have their RWP training? Is that what they do? It's like, what's what's the railway worker protection? It's like, okay, you guys have to have, there's CFR parts to every single thing we're looking at. It's not just a best practices thing. And I think that's where a lot of this information falls short. And that's kind of where Axiom really excels, is we know why these practices are in place. It's because they're backed by some type of, CFR part, or they're backed by some type of rules and regulations. It's not just a best practices. It's not just us going out there and saying, well, that's how we used to do it. Otherwise, we'd be yelling at people for not kicking cars in every facility and jumping on and off moving equipment. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to show them, here's the black and white, here's your responsibility, and let's build you up from there. Sometimes it's 2 or 3 years before FRA decides to drop into a customer site, right? FRA doesn't necessarily have the workforce to get out there and do all of these compliance audits. And a lot of these companies, they're fine with that. They're like, well, we'll just wait till they come around and we'll play dumb. Okay. And it's like, that's not an acceptable option. Maybe you as a business, you feel like that's you're willing to take that chance. But it's like the guys that are working out there for you, you owe it to them to be compliant. You owe it to them to have a good quality training program. You owe it to them to have consistent oversight and periodic oversight, right? And proper training qualifications and regimens. You owe it to them to run them through an OJT course. And this is all stuff that FRA is, trying to roll out, but they need the manpower to do it. And think about how many guys are out there working for FRA, how many of them have families, how many of them are able to travel to all of these thousands and thousands of transload sites, and then on top of that, it's like, okay, they've got to consistently manage them. Half the time they come out, they find a finding, they'll latch on, and maybe another agency will come out, or maybe another inspector gets invited out from a different vertical. And then they say, all right, we'll see you again in 3 years. And the customer thinks, okay, we're good. It's like, no, you're not. FRA can backdate some of that stuff. Most of that stuff they can backdate. And the majority of the time they say, we want to see your records from, dating the last 2 years. And we want to look at that. Now, when you look at the civil penalty list, it'll say per record, right? Or per instance. And so when we give these customers a worst case scenario, like you guys could be exposed up to, this amount of money. That's where they start to see the value, and they think, I'm not at risk of, several $100,000 or $500,000 in fines. And it's like, that's not me pulling that out of thin air. That's not, our inspector pulling it out of thin air. Here's the FRA civil penalty list, right? We go to FRA website, we pull it up, and we've put it into an Excel sheet, which FRA has also done. But we have like a little tabulator thing on the side where you can click the number of infractions and it tallies it at the bottom of the page per CFR part. So it's like, look, if you guys got blitzed, which is something FRA used to do, and I wish they'd get back to doing it, because sometimes fear is a healthy motivator for some of these big companies that try to overlook this compliance side, right? But if you tabulate all of these findings and it starts to show it, it's like, this is what you could be fined, right? For a willful violation even, right? And then at the bottom of that, there's like a little asterisk that says, an individual may be fined. That's not likely to happen, but it can happen. Right? If it's just like grossly negligent and somebody was killed because a company just didn't care, it's like, okay, well, you need to get your stuff together. Well, that goes back full circle. Where do they even start? And that's where Axiom comes into the picture. And I think it's so important that, we start to talk about this. I don't think there's anything wrong with getting ahead of the game and starting to talk about compliance, right? It doesn't just start and stop with best practice. And I think a lot of people get that confused. What we hear a lot of the time is, if I'm listening in on a sales call and somebody pushes back to one of our sales members, they'll say, we've got a guy here who does in-house training. Okay. When and where did he receive his qualifications or his training to do any of this stuff? We're good. We're trying to help you, right? We're trying to help you grow. We're trying to help your team. We're not just another door knocker type of selling solar panels. We're trying to help you in this industry. And there's not a lot of people that do it to the level that we do it to. So if you want, the most in-depth information, the most in-depth answers and steering you right, come to Axiom. We're going to tell you, this is what you need. This is where you should begin. And we're going to identify all of that stuff with you. The 243 is a big thing, right? Training and periodic oversight. FRA just put a new thing out in May. And that was one of the topics that was covered. There were some changes made to it. Some outdated things were changed. Some dates got removed, and, some testing out options are a thing. And it's like, okay, you guys need to stay up to date with this. It's like, well, who keeps, who does Part 216? Who does your special instructions? Who does your, emergency orders? Who's staying on top of that stuff? They don't have people that do that. Well, we do. That's our job, right? We love to read that stuff. We love to stay informed, and we want to help people out. So that's the mindset, that we're trying to push on the audits. Yes, it's beneficial to the customer. Yes, it's beneficial to the workforce. Yes, it's beneficial to the system as a whole. But more importantly, it changes that mentality of getting audited, right? It doesn't have to be a bad thing. We're not the IRS. We're not coming after you. We're here to help you, right? We want to be the proactive auditors. We want to help you get, in the right mindset. Some companies, they might have a rock star who says, hey, absolutely, please come out. I want this done. I'm so glad you guys called. And then they might get kneecapped by their CFO and say, no, we don't need that. We've got 30 guys in the warehouse. They can look and see what's wrong. It's like there's too much of a disconnect there. And that's, a huge portion of what this podcast is going to be, right? Is it's not just what we do, but it's like why we do that, why it's important. Because too many times, as I alluded to at the beginning of the show, was you have ownership who says, let's do this. And you have on-site teams who say, no. Well, the reverse can be true. You have on-site people who say, hey, we really need help at this site. And ownership says, no, we've got warm bodies. And it's like, that's not going to cut it. Just because you have a workforce there doesn't mean that that's what they do, right? I could hire an army of plumbers, but if I ask them all to be electricians, they're not going to know what to do. Well, that's the same problem in the transload space. You hire a bunch of guys who come from different backgrounds and you put them into one job site and tell them, hey, this is what you do now. They're only going to know how to get things done because as men, that's what we do. We go out there and we figure it out. But that doesn't mean that it's the right way, and it doesn't mean that it's the safe way. They'll get it done, okay? And we'll watch people do stuff, like crazy stuff. We had one customer who used to use these MyJack cranes, and they would drive up overhead, and they would get, bags and stuff out of these gondolas. And we had one guy who was hanging onto a hook as it was coming up, and it was empty. And the operator was lifting him up, and he was hanging onto the hook, and he set him up on top of the top of the gondola. And it was like, no way did I just see what I saw. These dudes are goofing around with this stuff. He could fall down. Like getting up on top of a rail car is no joke. If you fall down from that, you're going to get paralyzed. You're going to break a limb. You're going to be hurt, right? And these guys are joking around on the job site. It's like, does your ownership see that? Does your leadership team see that? What would they think if they saw that? What would a state inspector or a federal inspector see if they saw that? And that's another thing too, is a lot of these companies, a lot of these states, they have a 212 program, which is where they can essentially emulate the FRA. They can go out there and assess their own state level fines. A lot of these states opt into that part. And it's like, yeah, you can get a double whammy, right? It's not just coming from FRA, but maybe a state inspector sitting in. Illinois, for example, right? You might have FRA have an oversight on them, but then maybe the ICC, the Illinois Commerce Commission, comes in too, and they sit down. And it's like, oh, crap, right? Or maybe Texas, you have FRA and you have TxDOT go down there and they want to sit in on something. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that. Why are you guys here? It's like, well, they participate in this 212. They partake in it. So, and the forms they use are also FRA forms. So, yeah, you're going to get hit from multiple different levels, multiple agencies. And our job is to go in there and not just uncover that, but show you, here's your exposure, here's your financial risk, and here's your in-field risks, right? A lot of these companies, they take their workers for granted. I don't want to sound negative, but that's something that needs to be addressed too, is you've got people giving up their lives to come work for you. The least you can do, is make sure that them working there is safe, it's compliant, it's adequate working conditions. And that all begins with, well, what should we be doing? Let's have that discussion. Sometimes companies don't want to have it, or sometimes they don't want to have it once it reaches a dollar point. They're like, well, from here on, we're willing to accept that. I know when I've sat in on as an expert witness to cases, some railroads, some attorneys, some dickhead will say, oh, well, could you imagine the cost that the railroad would have to incur to put in a walking path there? It's like, well, what's the alternative? Some guy gets pinched in between the rail cars, right? Because there's no other walking path. Well, then maybe that's not an adequate job site, right? So the whole point is like, let's highlight these issues before they become a problem and somebody loses a limb or loses their life, and that all begins with a simple conversation. And of course, our job is to make dollars make sense for these customers because it takes a lot of time, right? We have to go out there to this customer site. We have to have continuous oversight. We have to continually be there to help them. And maybe most of the time, it's not just one site, right? It's a customer that has 10 or 12 different yards that we have to help manage. And each one of these yards does something totally different. And our job with our programs is to come in and standardize everything across that company so they can pull guys from site A and put them into site C and pull from site C and put them into site B. And they know exactly what they're supposed to do across their system, right? So it takes a long time and it's a lot of work. And that's why we say it requires a program manager to go in there and make sure that everything is cohesive, everything is fluid, everything is organized, because there's a lot of unorganized operations out there. And so if we can just paint the picture at even one site, then they can spread that around and show their other sites, hey, this is apparently what we're supposed to be doing. The good thing about us is that we can hit multiple sites, right, within that same week. Say your site A, site B, and site C are all doing these things. Here's what they're all supposed to be doing. Use our program and we'll standardize everything. Use our model program and let's run off of, let's use this, right? This is a simple plug and play and let's build you up from here, right? So there's a lot of stuff that goes into our audits. If you're getting, audited or having a gap analysis done over the phone, that's not adequate, right? If you have somebody who's going out there stopping all operations for complete shutdown, like that's too excessive, right? If you've got auditors who are out there like hiding in between trains trying to watch something happen, you've got dangerous acts happening out there. They didn't job brief with the crew or with the ownership, right? That's not appropriate. If you have people telling you just best practices or that's how they would have done it, then you're just adding fuel to that fire, right? That doesn't really help anything. You've just got another mindset in there telling you, well, that we could do it this way. It's like, no, you have to have a standard. You have to go off of what the CFR says. You have to be able to teach that and pass that down consistently over the years. Otherwise, you're going to lose that. And a lot of that begins with the culture, right? You have to have the right leadership culture to come in and say, let's start from this ground level and let's build it up from here. Otherwise, if we just deliver you a report, we're going to tell you what's wrong and nothing's going to get fixed, right? Same thing with online learning. If we go in there and we see that you have a quality management system or a learning management system or something, and you're just sending guys through these cycles and they're clicking next on everything and suddenly they come out and you've qualified them as a switchman or as a conductor or whatever, right? And there's no OJT. It's like, that's not going to cut it. When FRA comes in and they want to see these qualification standards and this criterion, it's like, oh yeah, he clicked next on a button for 40 minutes and he went through 18 different courses. That doesn't cut it, right? Likewise, again, on another case I had to sit in on as an expert, we looked at these people's training, and when we downloaded their training catalog from their online training, sometimes they were spending 18 seconds and sometimes it was only 1 minute and 34 seconds before they were done with that whole part, right? So how can you tell me, you're doing blue flags, learning how to throw switches, learning how to handle derails, and there's no OJT portion of that, and all of that was done online? Like, that's not going to stand up in court. That's not going to stand up with OSHA. That's not going to stand up with FRA. That doesn't cut it, right? There was no hands-on application or learning. There was nothing there. And I can see here that it took a total of less than 2 minutes to complete that training. That's the kind of stuff we're able to uncover. And a lot of the times when we go out to the site, again, these customers, they're nervous. They have a third party out there looking at all the skeletons in their closet. They try to keep some things, under wraps. They're like, well, let's not let this company, let's not let Axiom see all of what we do exactly. Let's just kind of give them the basics. Like, we can only help you grow so much if you're not willing to share that information with us. Like, that's why we do the non-disclosures, so they can see, hey, we're here on your team, right? And as it turns into a longer relationship with us, where we're not just doing the check-ins and the oversights and the audits, but we're actually doing these trainings, we're staying out there for, weeks at a time with these customers, and we're providing their OJT, we're doing their record keeping, we're doing their sign-offs. They start to see our same faces continuously, and they start to see Axiom's here. It's okay. Axiom's here. We'll wait till they come back. We'll wait till Mike or Joe or Dustin or whoever comes back on site, right? Those are our guys. They start to see us as that. And then it's nice because we give them all kinds of swag boxes. We give them hats. We give them jackets. We give them, cool little knick-knack things. And they have our logo and they give us stuff and we wear their logo. And it's like, look, this is what a mutual symbiotic relationship should look like, right? This is the kind of vendor that you want to have on call, is somebody who knows your guys by name, who understands your yard, who understands how you operate. And we've done this with customers for years, right? We've been the behind the scenes people for years. And probably the company that you're working at now has been some kind of interaction with us, right? Whether that was our model program or whether that was us training or whether that was us doing your audits. We've always been behind the scenes, and it's nice. It's a breath of fresh air to finally get to talk about that. If you've had an audit from us, feel free to comment on, what you thought of that. But the idea is, our relationship begins with compliance, and we go in and we tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. Our job is not there to pat you on the back. Not everybody comes out a winner. Not everybody is, going to be okay to start switching or doing whatever they want to do from day one. We're going to go in there and tell you this person should not be doing this. This site is has a bunch of unqualified workers on it. This site has no training. This site is not registered. We're going to tell you all of the good, the bad, and the ugly because we're indifferent to it, right? We want you to know where you're supposed to be. And that's the biggest part of an audit. Some people use it as a sales tool. Some people use it as, let's get out there and pat as many backs as we can. Some people use it as the worst doom and gloom ever. But we're going to give you an unbiased, professional audit and a full gap analysis that's going to show you this is where you're at, this is where you need to be. And then, of course, we have options if you choose to go with us, or if not, then, of course, we leave you with your own growth pattern, your own roadmap, and say, here's what you guys need to do to take care of this, right? Everything from vegetation at the site to wildlife encroachment to switching patterns, switching habits, efficiency, your blue flags, your spill plans, your registrations with, U.S. Coast Guard or FRA or with the state, whatever it is, we highlight and identify all of those things because our audits go so much deeper than that. It's not just one dude out there who his only specification is maybe hazmat and he's giving an opinion outside of that, right? We cover all of that. So hope you guys, learned something from that. Hope you got to see kind of a little bit into the weeds of what we do. Again, we do the facility, we do the compliance side, the CFR part, we do the record keeping, we do all of those things, and then we do the interviews as well, and then we do the track. Those are all things that we look at during our audits. It's very in-depth, and then we put it all into one big report, and we break it down with pictures, and it's very helpful to the customer, and it's helpful to the workforce, and our mission is to change this industry for the better by means of compliance, right? So if you liked this episode, be sure to give us a like and follow us. And thanks for listening in. If you liked this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and leave a review on what you thought about it. It goes a long way. Make sure to click that notification bell so you're always up to date whenever we release a new episode. For those watching on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with people who you feel would benefit from this show. Until next time, we'll see you soon on The Switch Point.
The views, opinions, and positions expressed by hosts, guests, contributors, and commenters on this podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or positions of Axiom Rail Services or any employee, affiliate, or organization associated with Axiom Rail Services. The appearance of guests, the publication of contributed content, or the discussion of any products, services, or viewpoints does not constitute an endorsement by Axiom Rail Services. Opinions expressed belong to the individuals speaking.